The kitchen was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tapping of my fingers against the counter as I absent-mindedly reached for a knife. The evening had settled in, casting long shadows across the marble as I moved through the familiar rhythm of making a snack, something simple, something quick. The overhead light bathed everything in a soft, golden glow, making the space feel smaller, more intimate. I hadn't expected him to still be here. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched me move. His presence was steady, comfortable in a way that felt almost too familiar, like he belonged here even though he didn't. There was something about the way he stood there, something in his eyes that made my pulse tick up just slightly. "Didn't take you for a late-night snacker," he mused, his voice low, laced with amusement. I smirked, not bothering to look up. "Didn't take you for someone who watches so closely." A chuckle, deep and quiet. Hard not to. The casual words sent a ripple through me, subtle but undeniable. I focused on slicing through the ripe fruit in front of me, the scent of citrus filling the air, fresh and sharp, a contrast to the warmth of his presence lingering just behind me. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that I felt it, the shift, the change in the air between us. My knife stilled against the cutting board. "Here," he murmured, reaching past me, his fingers brushing lightly against my wrist as he grabbed something from the counter. A small taste-testing spoon. "Try this." I frowned slightly, turning my head just enough to glance at him. "Try what?" The corner of his mouth lifted, something playful, something deliberate. "Just taste it." His fingers hovered near my lips now, holding the spoon, waiting. The pause stretched, a silent challenge sparking between us. My breath felt shallower than before, my body suddenly too aware of the way he was watching me, waiting for my reaction. I licked my lips, my voice softer than I intended. "And what if I don't like it?" His smirk deepened. "Then we'll have to try something else." The weight of his words settled between us, heavy with something unspoken. The kitchen, once just a place for something ordinary, no longer felt so simple. He moved closer, just a fraction of an inch, but I felt it, felt the heat of his body radiating against mine, the barely there space between us charged with something neither of us had acknowledged yet. My pulse quickened, my breath catching slightly as I stared at the spoon he held, my lips parting instinctively. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted it higher, closer, waiting, watching. "Go on," he murmured, his voice deeper now, rougher around the edges. "Just one taste." I hesitated, but not because I didn't want to. The weight of the moment, the anticipation curling around us, made the simplest action feel like something far more deliberate. When I finally leaned forward, my lips brushing against the cool surface of the spoon, I felt the way his breath hitched, barely audible but unmistakable. The taste was sweet, unexpected, but I barely registered it. Because the moment stretched far beyond what I was trying. It was the way his fingers lingered near my mouth, the way his gaze dropped just slightly, watching, waiting. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Not bad." His smirk was lazy, knowing. "Not bad?" I set the knife down, turning slightly to face him, the space between us nearly non-existent now. "I guess I could try more." His fingers ghosted along the counter, slow, teasing. "I think that's a good idea." I should have stepped back. I should have laughed it off, brushed past him, reminded myself that this was nothing more than a game of words. But I didn't. Instead, I stood still, waiting, wondering just how far we were both willing to go. The silence between us was thick, charged, stretching longer than it should have. The kitchen, once a place of routine and comfort, now felt smaller, the air warmer, filled with something I wasn't sure I was ready to name. But it was there, undeniable, pressing against my skin like the weight of his gaze. His fingers barely moved, but I felt them, still close, still lingering as if waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Instead, I held my breath, watching him, waiting. "You still want to taste more?" His voice was lower now, rougher, his amusement laced with something else, something heavier, something that made my stomach tighten. I swallowed, my fingers curling slightly against the cool surface of the counter. Maybe? His smirk deepened, his thumb brushing against the handle of the spoon before setting it aside. Then let's try something else. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for another piece of fruit from the cutting board. The scent of citrus filled the space between us, bright and sharp, contrasting with the thick tension that hung in the air. He lifted a small slice, holding it between his fingers, tilting his head slightly as if studying me. "Open," he murmured. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because everything about this moment felt deliberate, intimate in a way that neither of us was fully acknowledging yet. My lips parted just slightly, my breath uneven as he brought the fruit closer, pressing it lightly against my lower lip before slipping it inside my mouth. The burst of flavor hit my tongue, but my focus wasn't on the taste. It was on him, on the way his fingers lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, on the way his eyes never left my mouth as I swallowed. My breath was shallow, my body tense with awareness. "Sweet," I whispered, my voice barely audible. His gaze flickered, darkening slightly. "Yeah." Neither of us moved. The space between us had disappeared completely now, the warmth of him so close I could feel it against my skin. His hand was still hovering near my face as if waiting, as if testing just how far I was willing to go. I let my tongue flick over my bottom lip, a slow, unconscious movement, but I knew the second he noticed. His jaw tensed, his fingers twitching slightly, like he was holding himself back. "You shouldn't do that," he murmured, his voice rougher now, his restraint slipping. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Do what?" His smirk was barely there, but the tension in his shoulders, the sharp inhale he took, those gave him away. "You know exactly what." I let the silence stretch again, let the moment hover on the edge of something dangerous. Then, slowly, I reached for another piece of fruit, lifting it between my fingers, mirroring what he had done moments before. "Your turn," I whispered. His eyes flickered to my hand, then back to my face, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he was going to pull back, step away, remind us both of the line we were dangerously close to crossing. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned in, his lips parting slightly as I brought the fruit to his mouth. My fingers brushed against the warmth of his skin as he took it from me, his breath fanning over my knuckles. He didn't look away, didn't break eye contact as he chewed, swallowed, the air between us growing impossibly thick. "Sweet?" I asked, echoing his own words back to him. His lips curved just slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Yeah." The tension was unbearable now, the unspoken words hanging in the air between us like a challenge, a dare. His fingers twitched at his sides before he finally moved, his hand brushing against mine, slow, deliberate. "We should stop," he murmured, but there was no conviction in his voice. I let my fingers linger against his, my heart pounding. "Do you want to?" He exhaled sharply, his grip tightening slightly. "No." The kitchen, the house, the entire world faded away in that moment. There was only this, the weight of the decision we were about to make, the undeniable pull between us, the sharp realization that neither of us was going to stop this now. And I didn't want to.